Board President Boulay, trustees, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm very excited to share some updates, as Dr. Nicholas talked about funding, our programs, and just kind of where we're at as a special education department in Lambersville. First, I want to just be very clear and talk about what makes a special education student, or what is a special education student. And so just because a student has a disability doesn't necessarily qualify them for special education. There's 13 qualifying disabilities, but a student has to have a disability that then negatively impacts their educational performance and then requires special education services to help bridge the gap of that impact. And so it's not just a disability, but it's a disability plus an impact on their education. And so that's really the students we're talking about tonight. There's those students who have some struggles and some gaps and have a disability that's contributing to that we're providing support for. And so typically those students in our district are students that are receiving speech and language support. They're receiving specialized academic instruction, and that can look like students that are receiving resource support either in the classroom or they get pulled out of the classroom. It can be students in our special day class. We have a mild moderate special day class, as well as an extensive support needs classroom. Our extensive support needs classroom are students who have limited or nonverbal skills and just require a little bit more support than students in our mild moderate classroom. And then we have our life skills classroom at the high school, and those students are working on job skills, daily living skills, just to prepare them for life after high school. And so that's typically the type of main services our students receive. They also receive kind of related services in terms of occupational therapy, physical therapy, deaf and hard hearing services. So there's a conglomerate of services they receive, but primarily this is the students, the primary services they receive in our district. And when we talk about special education, what I really want to highlight is just kind of where we're at as a state. So this is a graph of the last 10 years of state enrollment overall. So the red bar graph is overall state enrollment in public education. And you can see over the last 10 years, that enrollment has been declining. But what you'll notice is the blue bar graph has been increasing, which is representation of students with disabilities. So the amount of students with disabilities has been climbing, while overall enrollment has been declining. So there's the percent of enrollment of students with disabilities, you can see that yellow line graph, has been steadily climbing over the last 10 years. Our district, however, we've been pretty consistent in terms of our numbers of students with disabilities. You can see the red is our overall enrollment over the last 4 years, and then the blue is our students with disabilities number. So last year we had 600 students with disabilities, or students receiving special education services, which has been pretty consistent over the last 4 years of about 7.5%. This is a really interesting graph from School Services of California. What you'll see, and Trustee Modi just referred to that very fun time in 2020 called COVID. You'll see in the far right, the students with disabilities 0 to 5. During that year of 2020, you'll see a negative 14.63%. What that means is there was a huge decline in the amount of students who are identified as needing special education services. And why is that? Well, they weren't in school, they weren't in preschools, they weren't in play groups or anything else that help parents or other people identify or recommend maybe seeing a pediatrician or something else. But what you'll see is to the two bar graphs to the right of that, we're catching up. And so over the last few years, we've seen a huge growth in students with disabilities that have been identified. And that's because we are catching up from the COVID years. Those students are now entering school in their early years of school, and they're starting to be identified, and we're starting to see them more and more and get them services now. And you'll see that across the board. So the far left is students with disabilities 0 to 22. Then we have 6 to 22 in the 0 to 5 range. And you'll see they all took a hit during COVID, and then they're steadily have rebound. That'll flatten out at some point, but we're still seeing a pretty gradual increase in the amount of students with disabilities. And you can see that here. And so what I really want to pay attention to on this is if you look at, we already looked at the CalPADS enrollment for the state and the student with disability count, but if you look at the significant disability count or percent, you'll see that that number's been gradually growing as well, where the state's got about 31 students who are identified as having a significant disability. And that's 20,000 growth over the last few years. About 20,000 students on average are growing in that category. To the far right, you'll see autism, students with an autism disability, and you'll see that's also been growing over the years too. So both significant disability and students with autism have been growing, and we see that in our district as well. So you'll see on the bottom on this table is the state numbers from 23-24. They don't have the 24-25 numbers for the state, but in comparison to our 24-25 numbers, you'll see that we're about half. So the state average is about, or the state has 14.58% students with disability enrollment. We as a district are at 7.45, so we're about half, which is good because that's a lot of just attributed work to the work our teachers are doing, the work Dr. Nicholas has done in terms of, and the board, in terms of highlighting and focusing on that 20% and getting them the support and interventions early as opposed to waiting and then qualifying for special education services. However, what you'll see in our population is over half of our students have significant disability, which is quite substantially higher than the state average of 31%. And then we also have a higher prevalence of students with autism, about 5% higher than the state. So we have a lower overall percent of students with disabilities, but our students with disabilities have higher needs than typical state. The other thing that we experience in Mountain House is we have tremendous growth, as we all know, right? There's no shortage of students. And with that, we have a lot of students that are moving into the district that have IEPs already. So these are not students that we qualified for special education services. These are students who moved into the district with an IEP. So if you add those numbers up, over the last 3 years, about a quarter of our students in special education have moved into the district with an IEP. And that's pretty substantial because we have taken a lot of pride and a lot of time in developing really good systems and supports in our special education department. And so when we have a student move in, we get them aligned and moving in that support to help close that gap. And when we're having, like last year, we had 74 students move in. That's a pretty substantial number to get in, get them acclimated, and get them moving through our system so we can get them back in the general education environment as much as possible. Now let's talk about funding, because all of that is impacted by funding. And you'll see over the last 10 years, the blue and yellow, the blue is the federal revenues percent contributing to special education funding, the yellow is the state, and the green is us, local control, right? And to no one's surprise, the state and Fed have decreased over the last 10 years the amount of funding they provided, and the district has had to kick in, or the local control has had to create the stopgap for that. So over the last 5 years, the state and Fed have slowly started to increase their contribution again, but because of the total cost of special education and just how they have incrementally increased, it really doesn't have much of an impact in terms of what they're contributing to us because of the total cost of special education in general. So it's a lot of district, which you'll see next, or in just a second. So what I want to talk before we get to the next slide, which is our projected funding for 25-26, is our SELPA funding. So we receive funding from the state, but it goes through the SELPA. And previously, before Dr. Nicholas worked extremely hard to write this, our SELPA had an ADA model. And that model was the SELPA took a percent of your ADA right off the top. And so you had districts that were overutilizers and underutilizers. So if you were underutilizing, you contributed to those who were overutilizing. And we were an underutilizer by about 3.5%. So we were contributing to others. And Dr. Nicholas saw that and said, this isn't right, and worked extremely hard with the SELPA to change the funding. And starting last year, we have what our current model is, which is a utilization model. So we are funded based on the percent of the program we utilize. There's no more overutilizers, underutilizers. You pay for what you use. And so that brought back over $1.5 million back into the district that we can use for our own programs and supports. And so with this utilization model, they take 3 timestamps throughout the year and they average that out, and that's what your utilization is, your percent. So what's that look like projection for this year? So right off the top, the AB 602 goes to the SELPA based off our ADA, and that's the $7.25 million you see there. That's funded off our ADA. Based off our projected utilization of county programs, we'll receive back about $2.5 or $2.4 million. which then means our general fund has to kick in about $7.7 million to cover the rest of the support, services, and staffing for special education. And we do receive that great federal funding of about $900,000. And this is all projections. So again, utilization, if we don't use all of our projection, we'll have more back at the end of the year. If we use more, we'll have less. So in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of revamping in our special education department. With that was first the funding, right? Because now with the more funding in the district, we're able to change some of our programs. We expanded our programs. Previously, our county had a wait list for students that needed the support of a little bit higher level program. Dr. Nicholas said, no, we're not having students wait for that. Let's open our own program because now we have the funding. So we opened an extensive support needs classroom, and we continue to expand our programs and supports, including our staff. We've added more behaviorists, more psychologists to help make sure we're supporting students, because we are seeing more students with behavioral needs and social emotional needs that are on IEPs. And with that, we revamped our systems to make sure that those referrals are getting to us at the right time, that we're not waiting, like we talked about in terms of providing support and intervention to students. Our behaviorists have a referral system that they can go right in and support a general education student in a general education classroom in terms of working with the teacher and providing support and training for them. We've also really looked at our curriculum, which we'll talk more about in just a little bit, but identifying any gaps we had in that. So we changed our TK2 curriculum for math, and we've also revamped some of our curriculum in the 3rd through 8th grades to make sure to align to moving kids back into the general education classroom. So that when they go back into that classroom and they're included in that classroom, it's not a learning curve to learn the new curriculum, but they're used to and exposed to what the students in the general education environment are receiving with support. And then we've taken a lot more data. In our SDC class, our teachers are doing a great job of tracking data and making sure that students have the learning skills or the readiness skills to move into that general education classroom, and we have the data to support that, because it's scary for everybody. It's scary for the general education teacher, it's scary for the parents when we're saying, hey, they're ready, we're gonna transition them, and everyone's like, wait, are you sure they're ready? And we're like, yes, now we have the data to show, yes, they're very ready. And most importantly too, we've really worked on a lot of legal compliance in the last 2 years. With our legal representation. We've had our legal representation work with us on making sure our IEPs are legally compliant, worked with our psychologists and SLPs to create assessment checklists to make sure our assessments have everything they need to be legally compliant and sound. Because one, we want to make sure we're doing everything correct, but two, in our district, we do have a high prevalence of advocacy in our district, and advocates are great. They can be a great collaboration for the parents, a great support for the parents. They can be a great bridge in some of those discussions. However, there are some that take advantage of parents and just kind of the environment of special education. And they're there to line their pockets, I will say, not for the right reasons. And so in order to combat some of that, we've really stepped up our game in terms of making sure that they can't try to focus on that and make it contentious, because we keep to very strict compliance standards in terms of what we expect of our staff when we present it to parents. Also, since July 1st, 2022, because of the growth, we've added an additional 7 SDC classrooms. We now have a total of 14 SDC classrooms, which is a huge amount of growth. Each of those classrooms have between about 10 to 12 students, so that's about 70 to 84 students that we've added in our SDC classes. We have 11 mild moderate classes, 2 extensive support needs classes, and 1 life skills class. And those are spread out. We have the full continuum at Cuesta, Wickland, and then Altamont has an ESN class in the high school. And with that, we've had a lot of new teachers, a lot of new staff in general. We've had 30 new teachers. And if we look at that, that seems like a large number, but it's really a good number to have, because we've had 7 new SDC teachers, so that takes 7 away from that number. We've also opened new schools. So with opening new schools, we add new teachers. We've also grown as a district, so we have some schools that went from 1 resource teacher to 2 resource teachers. And in a teaching shortage, we're able to find staff. We have people applying to work in our staff because our district and what we provide in support and just the type of environment that we provide. We had one psychologist opening this year, and we had 50 applicants for that position. So there's a shortage in teaching, but we don't have any shortage of applicants. However, not all applicants know what they are getting into when they sign up for special education, or the expectations we have as a district, because we do have high expectations, especially for our students that have some of those bigger gaps that we need to fill. And so some of that is staff that just, special education wasn't for them, or it wasn't for them here, right? Because of our expectations and what we expect. And but we've also, with that too, we've promoted teachers as well. We have a teacher that's now a coordinator, and so a lot of that is great growth, and some of that is just because we expect high expectations for our students, and we expect our teachers to do the best for our students. So let's talk about how all this goes to results. And the state has multiple measures they look at. It's almost like special education has its own dashboard. They look at everything from least restrictive environment to parent involvement, and they do look at test scores as well, which we'll talk about in just a second. Some of the things I want to highlight is we are ranked a 9 out of 10 for math and special education in the state. So we're in the top 90th percentile for special education students in math scores, and a 7 out of 10 for ELA, so top 70th percentile. We have a continuous improvement and monitoring plan that we have to develop because of significant disproportionality, meaning a certain group of students is identified higher in a certain area. And that's, again, a large part is students moving into the district, because that counts towards that. With that, we have to target specific students that are not special education but are on the trajectory to be going that direction. And so we have 30 students we identified in this 24-25 plan. Out of those 30 students, 6 are now at grade level, and these are students that were substantially below grade level. The other 24 have made progress. They're just not there yet, but they're making great progress based off the plan and the work the teachers and team is doing. What I'm most excited about, and this is a great number, is this year we exited 57 special education students, meaning they tested out of special education. They no longer qualify for that need, meaning we closed the gap for those students. And a lot of times you'll see this, as you see, there's 34 speech students, which is great, meaning they no longer require speech services. Either they fix their articulation error, or maybe they don't have the language disability that is still there, but it's not impacting them as much. But what's really exciting is 23 of those students were receiving specialized academic instruction. As we went back to the front, remember, to qualify for special education, you have to have a disability that significantly impacts your performance. Usually that's 2 years, generally 2 years below grade level. So that means that we had 23 of our special education students who closed that gap this year and are now no longer considered special education students. They're now general education students, and they've closed the gap, which is exciting. That's what we really celebrate. And then we've also had several students that we've moved from our SDC program back into the general education program with resource support. So we're moving students all the time in the right direction. One of the other things the state looks at is parent involvement. The state has a target. You have to have 97% of your parents have to identify on the IEP that they felt involved or included in the IEP process. They have to check a box, sign their name to it. State target's 97%. We had 100% this last year. One of the other things the state looks at is least restrictive environment or inclusion. They have targets for each of these areas. So 5A you'll see is the state wants to see how many students spend 80% or more of their day in the general education classroom. The state had a target of 67%. We have 75% of our students with disabilities spending their day in general education. So we beat the state target. 5B is students who are in the general education classroom less than 40% of the day. So you want to be lower than the state target. The state target's 13.5%. We're at 11.6%. The state target changes each year, and we've already beat it for this year too. And then the third one is students who are in private settings, whether that be residential facilities, non-public schools, and the state target, again, for that, you'll see is 2.6. You want to be lower than that. We're about 1.3, about half of it. So again, we met that state target. So these are some of the great numbers we look at. Now we're going to get into CASP. And CASP is one of those funny things we look at for students with disabilities, because what CASP is measuring is students who meet or exceed their grade level standards. But as we know of students with disabilities, that they qualify for special education because they have a disability that's significantly impacting the performance, typically 2 years below grade level, right? So shouldn't see a huge number of students meeting standard, but we do have a great number in our district. So you'll see we're pretty consistent, 23, 24, and 24, 25. The red is our ELA score. So we jumped 1% from last year to this year in ELA, and that's where we have the rank of 7 out of 10 in the state. For science, we stayed the same, about 14% of our students met or exceed standards. And then for math, 21%, 23, 24. And then in 24, 25, 20%, that's where we're ranked 9 out of 10 in the state. So what the state does set targets for is certain grade levels for CASP. They set targets for 4th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade. And so what we'll see here is 4th grade. The state target for 4th grade for both 23, 24, and 24, 25 was 16%. And you can see that in both years for both ELA and math, we exceeded the state target for our 4th grade students. Pretty substantially too, especially in math. Then we go to 8th grade, and what you'll see is that state target changes. And why does that state target change? Is because the state knows that a longer a student's been in special education, usually the larger the gap, right? The sooner we can get and support them, the smaller the gap, and usually the sooner we can close it. But as they stay in special education longer and longer, a lot of times it's because there's a larger gap we're working to close. So they lower that state target. You can see we still have beat that state target. And again, these are students who are still identified as students with disability or receiving special education services. These are special education students. The 54 students we exited that are now at grade level, they don't count for these scores. They now go into the general education scores. So these are students that are 2 years or more behind still receiving services that they haven't tested out as special education or they're still eligible for services. Then we go to 11th grade. You can see 23, 24, we did not meet the state targets for ELA or math, and they're still at that 9 for the state target. However, in 24, 25, we did meet it for ELA. We had some good growth there. And we didn't meet it for math, but we had some really good growth there. And so I want to talk about 11th grade and the special education at the high school. 2 years ago, Dr. Nicholas had us do an audit of the special education program at the high school. And what we found is there were some things we needed to work on. We needed to work on some just logistical planning in terms of how students were taking the courses, how long they were in a course, and what they were receiving in that course in terms of curriculum. And so this last year was the first implementation of a lot of the changes we made in terms of how they're scheduled in their day, the type of support they're receiving, and the curriculum they're using. And we're continuing to work on that. And so while we didn't meet the target in math, we're seeing that growth, and I think we'll see that continue because of the changes we've made based off the audit we did. We had a program that wasn't meeting the needs of our students, and now we've made those changes, and we're well on the way to continue that growth. And these are also the hardest kids to move. So our 11th grade students have been in special education a lot of times the longest, and so that gap is generally fairly large, and so it's very difficult to move the students, not impossible, difficult with the right supports, and that's what we continue to focus on and work on. So just some highlights again. Our ELA and math program for special education is highly ranked in the state. Our parent involvement we have high levels of parent involvement. Our inclusion and support of students is highly inclusive environment. Overall, we're exceeding the state targets in least restrictive environment, preschool, CAF scores, pretty much in all areas. And then that's all great, but our job as special educators is to work ourselves out of a job. That all the kids are back in general education, there's no need for us anymore. And so we have a continuous focus on making sure that we improve, that we're growing supports for our students, we're evaluating our programs and making sure that we continue to move them in the right direction. Might take a couple years, but we want to move them and keep moving them. So with that, thank you. Any questions?